Welcome to another episode of Household Filmmaking. I am your mostly fearless leader and host, Christopher Moonlight. We're going to be talking about three topics today. Number one, I have a movie script, but should I turn it into a comic book? We're going to address that issue along with talking about the Wonder Woman movie. Just saw that, have a lot of thoughts about it, thought it was really good, and hope that it is kind of a herald of maybe a new trend in filmmaking and storytelling. And also going to be talking about my Patreon and the issue of am I too old to be doing this? But I've got a lot of things to talk about. What's to come with the Patreon and why you should be in on it before anyone else is. So let's get started. Number one issue, like I said, the idea of you have a movie script and you want to turn it into a comic book, kind of one of many ways to do a proof of concept. Proof of concept is, it's changed over the years. It used to be that you would come up with kind of a proof of concept that was just to sell a story to a would-be producer or investor, show them what was possible, and you may do that through shooting a little short film or coming up with a script and storyboards and some concept art and giving a good pitch, a good presentation. But now proof of concept has kind of changed because along with proof of concept, you have to show that there is an audience, that you have an audience, you have a following. This may come in the form of, hey, we've got this star, which a lot of times helps. It may be something like Harbinger Down, which I had the pleasure of working on, had Lance Henriksen, who has a following, and their Kickstarter was kind of a proof of concept. They did a little short film of a guy going down into the hold of a ship and being attacked by a creature. No, he wasn't attacked by a creature. He kind of had and this was before Alien Covenant, he had a backburster come out of him. And it was pretty cool. And then they released some behind the scenes of how they put it together on a budget. And then they released the Kickstarter. And, Amalgamated Dynamics Incorporated, Studio ADI, Alec Gillis, Tom Woodruff Jr., they had their own brand already as well. They were well known for doing the Aliens movies, Aliens vs. Predator, Tremors, Starship Troopers, Jumanji, Spider-Man, the Thing prequel, and they kind of had that whole controversy. And if you don't know about this, go to Studio ADI's YouTube channel and search for The Thing, because there was a controversy when the Thing prequel was made. Everyone was excited that it would be kind of a callback to the original Thing, where there was practical effects done by Rob Bottin. So they had a lot going for them already. So they had a fan following, and they had people who wanted to be involved. So it wasn't that hard for them. But for you may be thinking, well, I don't have a following. I don't have, I've got this script, and it's going to cost a certain amount of money to produce. It may be $100 million movie for all, but you want to get it out there, and you want to turn it into a comic book. Now, I have, I would say if you really want to do that, I have some bad news for you. And that is, first of all, there is not a overly large audience for comic books these days. I'm a huge comic book fan, but the audience that is there for comic books, they're an audience that has been built up over a large amount of time, and they have a passion for the art form of comic books. They don't just buy random stuff, and they can kind of sniff out when a comic book story is not there because somebody had the desire to create a great comic book, like the creators that so many fans love, whether you're talking about Stan Lee or Alan Moore, or someone like James O'Barr who created The Crow, or I'm trying to think of some others. Todd McFarlane, who created Spawn, Neil Gaiman, who created Sandman. These were all people who understood and loved the craft of comic books. And that is a very important part of why those stories are so beloved and so successful. Whereas you get something like, I don't know, kind of telling tales out of school. And, take this with a grain of salt. This is my point of view. But when I was at the San Diego Comic-Con in, I don't know, it was the early 2000s. But I met the creator of, I forget what the publisher was, but it was the creator of the comic book The Surrogates, which was a story of a future where everybody had a robot duplicate of themselves, and all they did was lie at home and kind of through virtual reality and remote control live through this idealized surrogate body of themselves. So if they wanted to be slender and good looking and look good in clothes and have lots of hair, when in real life they were fat and, had breathing problems and pimples and were balding, they could go do that, which I thought was a very good idea. But when I met the creator of it, they already were talking about how they were pitching it for a movie, and it was going to be something that was going to be developed. And I thought to myself, and I read the comic and it was all right, but it did have that sense that the creator wasn't really thinking about what a great comic this would be. They were thinking about what a great movie it would be. And then the movie came out, and I don't know if it was successful. It seemed to come and go. I saw the trailer for it in the theaters. I didn't go see it in the theaters. It was on TV a few months back, and I watched a few minutes of it and went, not interested. And, I think that's what you're kind of up against. And I think part of the reason is people don't understand that movies and comic books are their own vocabularies. And what does that mean? Well, I kind of, this got addressed a little bit in a short documentary I made. It's on my YouTube channel if you want to check it out. It's also on my Patreon, called When Hollywood Greenlit Comic Con. And I kind of went and talked to comics creators who had all sorts of interesting things to say about how Hollywood has had an impact on their industry. Now, one of the points that was made, and I believe it was by David Mack, was when you're dealing with a comic book, you're dealing by the page. And each page is a unit of thought. And you also have to keep in mind when you write dialogue, that dialogue takes up space on the page. Where in a movie, obviously, when someone talks, it doesn't take up any space in the image. It's a separate thing from itself. And here's another thing. A comic book is much more interactive. The reader has to directly engage the comic book to get the story from it. As their eyes move from panel to panel, their imaginations move the characters. They create the voices for the characters as they read the dialogue. And the artist has to encapsulate every unit of thought in a page. And that's very liberating in a lot of ways. The comic book page is very flexible as far as how much story you can get in there. But each page has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you have to make sure that just like any story, each page has to set up your thought, your idea. And then the second part of the page moves it along. And then the third part gives you a conclusion/cliffhanger. And you're setting it up for the next page when you turn the page or you jump over to the next page. And if you're on the left-hand page, you have the beginning, middle, end with a cliffhanger. Next page picks up where that cliffhanger left off, sets up the next idea within that page, gives you a middle and an end and another cliffhanger. And then when you turn the page, that's your payoff. That's your surprise. And actually each 3 panels generally, and it can be done in 4 panels, 5 panels. Some people do it in 2 panels. Each 3 panels, say if you have a panel grid on a page does that. So you top of the panel, set up the thought. Second, move it along. Third, conclude the thought with a cliffhanger. Then you move down to the next 3 panels, picks up where it left off on the cliffhanger, establishes the new idea. So you're continually progressing through the page. Now, some pages are splash pages. Some artists choose to do very different, interesting things with the panels. But you have to have that basic idea of writing a comic book page before you can start to play around with the visuals. And the great thing about the visuals of a comic book page as well is you are not actually just confined to panels. You can change the shapes of the panels. You can make them more horizontal, more vertical. You may do lots of panels to kind of speed up the action. You may have the panels kind of start to break away and shift and look like they're falling if a character is falling. There's all sorts of interesting visual things you can do to make a beautiful, striking image that sucks your reader in. And, there's no set formula of what's going to be successful. Every artist has their style of doing that. I would recommend reading some of the better comic books and checking out some of the more interesting artists to see how they achieve these things. I'm always going to recommend Alan Moore. Alan Moore wrote The Watchmen, wrote V for Vendetta, wrote League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, all and From Hell. All were made into movies, and none of them were successful in the way that the comic books were. I think Watchmen was the closest, but when you watch The Watchmen on the screen, it's the closest to the comic book, but it doesn't quite flow, wasn't successful as a movie because you were watching the comic book story play out in real time, and so at times it was slow, the pacing was weird. Things that happened were very kind of traumatic and disturbing, and it was good because the story is good, but it was also kind of a trying experience for the audience because they didn't understand that what they were watching was the comic book. Frank Miller is another example. You saw Robert Rodriguez and Frank Miller did the Sin City movie, and it was very interesting, and I really like that movies are kind of breaking away into these weird styles and trying new experimental things. I think that's very important. But when you look at the original Sin City comic book, it is Frank Miller's art that sucks you in, and a computer reproduction of Frank Miller's art and using the panels of Frank Miller's story as storyboards kind of makes it makes it harder for the audience to relate because they want to see a movie. They want to see something move like a movie. That's why a lot of books that get turned into movies, the story gets changed, and then the author gets mad, and the audience gets mad and goes, "Oh, I wish they would have made it more like the book." But the truth is that these things that we love, that audiences love, are written for the medium. I also recommend looking up on YouTube, The Medium is the Message. It's very interesting, but I won't go into that right now. So if you're going to turn your story into a comic book, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, but I think you have to separate yourself from the movie for a while to make sure that your comic book is going to be successful as a comic book and something that comic book readers can get into and love because you have a love for the medium. But, you just have to remember, I can't stress it enough, each page is a unit of thought with a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you're publishing your comic online and a reader comes across one of your pages, and it's in the middle of the story, you have to make sure that your page is set up in a way that maybe they don't know who the character is, or maybe they don't know what the universe is, but because that page has a beginning, a middle, and an end, they understand what each character on that page wants. They understand some form of motivation and some sort of mode of them trying to get it. And they understand by the end of the page if they achieve something. And, give them an idea of what they're going to do now that they achieved it, or what they're going to do now that they were denied what it was. Because any other way of doing it, you're going to leave that reader cold, and they're not going to want to go and find the other pages. So again, if you're trying to turn your story into a comic book, go read comic books. Go check out artists. Understand who Alan Davis is, and Dave Gibbons, and J.H. Williams III, and David Mack. And there are all these artists who do it all sorts of different ways, but they all have a clear understanding of what is to be gained from the medium and how it works, right down to the word balloons. So check out, I don't know if it's still available online, but the artist Eddie Campbell, who did From Hell with Alan Moore, had a wonderful blog where he would talk all about word balloons and how word balloons work, because it's not just reading them left to right. Word balloons lead the eye, just like the aesthetic of the page leads the eye. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that, because it is a complex topic. But if you want to turn your movie into a comic book, understand that it's not just a cheap way of getting your story out there and in front of people. It's very important to understand the medium of comic books. If you're an artist, what you need to do as an artist to make your comic book beautiful. If you're not an artist, what to look for in an artist, which may be a topic in itself. Maybe I should get a comic book artist other than myself on the show to talk a little bit about that. I think that might be interesting. Don't just look at it as a cheap vehicle for your story, because you will sabotage your story in the process, and it'll be a lot of energy spent for nothing, and spent in a medium that you maybe don't care about. It might not be your medium. Consider that, and consider that it's kind of rude to subject a comic book reader to a story that is written by someone who doesn't care about comic books. You could end up sabotaging the whole deal and turning people off from your story, which I know you don't want to do. Okay, next issue up is kind of a personal issue for me. It is, it's kind of the idea of you start asking yourself, am I too old to do this stuff? Am I too old to be a filmmaker? Is this a young man's game, young woman's game? And, I'm not going to lie, it does get harder as you get older. And one of the things is you kind of take that chance. You put all of your eggs in the entrepreneurial basket of becoming a filmmaker, and it's a risk. And if there's, at a certain point you don't see success, you may have to go, okay, like maybe it's time to rejoin the workforce while I work on this. But you've reached a certain age where it's harder to get work. You've been out of the loop for too long. And there are real rock stars out there, who are just, they know all the programs, they know all the latest equipment, they know all the latest techniques, and, that puts them ahead of the game. And they're young, they're energetic, they've got a lot of, they don't have kids yet, maybe, they've got a lot of time to dedicate to this stuff, and it's hard to compete with that. As a filmmaker myself, I have a lot of old school methods of doing things, and what I feel I do have on my side, what I kind of personally, this sounds very kind of self-congratulatory, but I have that creativity that kind of transcends just the technologies. I understand how to tell a good story. I understand how to make it visually interesting and do really neat things, but I don't know all the latest, I don't know how to paint in CGI, and I don't know how to use the latest versions of some of the programs, and I'm trying to keep up with that sort of thing. So, you do kind of find yourself at a crossroads. You think to yourself, what am I, I can't quite return to the workforce because I'm not up to date on everything, and there are people who are miles ahead of me with far more energy who will do it for less money and don't have kids to worry about. and then you think, well, then I've got to be an entrepreneur and I've got to go out there and build it myself, but that takes finances. So, I think this is something that if you are a filmmaker and you're maybe in your early 30s, start thinking about this now. Take your time with your filmmaking, but make sure that you are constantly learning, you're constantly up to date, and find that niche, find that place where you're comfortable and people know you have a talent and they can go to you and you'll be up to date and you'll get them what they want. Because you'll reach a certain age where if you haven't made some sort of name for yourself, nobody's going to want to talk to you. They may talk to you, but, they're going to go with someone else. So, you've got to get to a point where you're either established in a certain thing that you're making money and then you can work on your film project, on your off hours. Or you have gotten someplace with your film projects where it's self-sustainable. Now that's a very difficult thing. It's something that I'm trying to figure out, and I think a lot of people are also trying to figure out. So that brings me to my Patreon, and I have a lot of knowledge to share, and I'm going to start bringing other people on this show to interview, whether it be writers or artists or other independent filmmakers, or maybe we'll find some big filmmakers to bring on. If you're listening to The Practical People, you know that I've managed to bring on some of the best practical effects artists in the business. So I am trying to reach Patreon goal of $4,000 a month. And, if it's 3,000, I think that'll work too. But 4,000 a month is where I can be self-sustaining. And what I'm going to do is I'm finishing up the Quantum Terror. I'm going to create some videos about how I created some of the creature work for the Quantum Terror on a very low budget. And then I'm going to create another science fiction movie project. And we are going to start out with the script. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to storyboard it, how I'm going to take those storyboards and turn them into animatics, take those animatics and turn them into animations, and then we're going to slowly work and bring that story 100% to life. And you're going to go on the journey with me, and if I can reach that $4,000 pledge goal, I'm going to take you along the entire way until there'll be a finished film, and hopefully you'll be following along and doing your own thing using these techniques, and you can have a finished film by that point as well. So, Patreon is something I'm still working out, and I'm trying to come up with new content. These podcasts, hopefully they're interesting to you. There's a lot I've learned, and I have a lot to teach, and I have some really great science fiction and horror stories to tell. Alien planets, strange organic computers, stretching from giant robots and giant monsters to Frank Frazetta style action, all sorts of just stuff that I'm gonna keep posting about it, and creating artwork for it. So, and we're gonna do it using bubble wrap and saran wrap and liquid latex and Sculpey from the craft store and green screen. And I think you're gonna learn a lot from it. And maybe we'll give the Stan Winston School of Character Arts a run for their money as far as low budget filmmaking goes. All right, so I've talked enough about that. Did everyone see Wonder Woman? I saw Wonder Woman. I'm going to talk spoilers now, but I actually really loved this movie. It wasn't a perfect movie. It kind of started off a little bit like a Xena Warrior Princess episode, which I'm not a fan of. And, the end battle was kind of hokey CGI with that cheesy "I will destroy you" dialogue, which I don't know where that came from because the dialogue was so beautiful. It was so well written. for the rest of this movie, and the characters were so well developed. And I gotta say, watch this movie, and I think we may be transitioning to a new era of film that is more hopeful. I think a lot of people are looking for that right now. And, I think if you want to be a successful filmmaker, you need to ask yourself, what can I create that is hopeful? Because I think people have been pessimistic for far too long. They're tired of it. They want some hope. They want something that they can identify with. And I think that's a big problem that a lot of films for the past, far too long, at least 20 years, it's a mistake they've been making. And that is a lot of filmmakers decided that they wanted to preach to their audience. They had something important to say, and they were right, and their audience needed to be schooled. And, maybe some filmmakers do. Maybe there are some very insightful philosophical filmmakers who do, but there are also a lot of filmmakers out there who are just kind of hanging on to cliches and thinking that they're truth, and then kind of drilling these preachy cliches into their audience head until their audience has had enough. I won't mention any particular movies that do this, but I know that pretty much everyone I talk to has one in mind when I speak this. It's just don't teach that lesson. You need to give your audience something they can relate to. Say that again. Your audience wants to go to the movies and relate to the characters on screen, and maybe feel like the filmmaker relates to them, and also maybe has a little bit of insight that doesn't give them an answer, but gives them a little sense that there is an answer out there, gives them some hope. We identify, romances have been so successful because we identify with romance. We've all been in love. I'm still in love with my wife. We all love movies about family because we all have family. And when we see movies where families have issues, we can identify with those family issues as well. And we don't always get solutions from the movie or the show. I love the cartoon Archer. It's if you haven't seen it, it's this very vulgar, offensive, lowbrow spy show with these really kooky characters who are not good people for the most part, but they have good in them, and they interact like a family. But even though they're not related, there's the character Archer and his mother, but even though they're not related, they act like a family unit. They bicker, they argue, they insult each other, but they're also always together, and they're there for each other. So anyway, I'm getting far away from Wonder Woman. But I really love this about Wonder Woman. When you meet Wonder Woman, she's not a Mary Sue at all. Mary Sue, if you don't know, just means like this perfect character. No flaws, they kick butt. They've always got the answer. They're morally upright all the time. They're always doing the right thing. And maybe making other people around them look like fools. Wonder Woman is a very well-educated, well-trained warrior princess. And then she meets someone from the outside, which is a character played by Chris Pine. And he is much more worldly. They go on this adventure together. And what I love about it is they go on the adventure together. He's not an idiot sidekick. And she's not a perfect character. She's very naive in a lot of ways. And as we go through the movie, she's confronted by her preconceived ideas. And she's confronted with the reality that the things that she was very sure of are not what turned out to be true. And Chris Pine Pine's character, on the other hand, is a very morally upright character, but he has a lot of flaws, and he introduces to her to a lot of people who are also at heart good people, but they've been through bad things, and so they come across to her at first as bad people, and she's kind of judgmental of them. As time goes on, she learns more about them, and they all become close. And Chris Pine's character, he seems to be someone who has every right to be cynical about the world. He has he's seen awful things, bad things have happened to him, but he chooses, and this is very important choice, his character chooses to remain positive about these things. He chooses to see the good in mankind and continue to fight for what he believes is right. So when Wonder Woman is in her lowest point, when she realizes that everything that she's fighting, that she thinks she's fighting, isn't going to solve all the problems when she wins, when she's downtrodden, it's him that picks her up. And there are points where she picks him up, things that he thinks can't be changed, and she, in her tenacity, goes and fights to change them. And together they learn from each other, and they learn that they are more together than they were separately. So that might not be the best summary, but I just love that hopeful message, and I hope that other filmmakers see that and see how the audience reacted to this. The audience loved it, and I loved it because it tells me that the audience for this movie wants to see something that recognizes the good in them, despite all the ugly things that are happening around us, and wants to hope that, yes, we can continue to work and fight to keep things better, and acknowledging that there are always going to be ugly things and choosing to hope in the face of that anyway. I think that's a marvelous thing for a movie to present, and I really haven't seen it, or not much of it, in a very long time. Even in a lot of movies, when the hero is triumphant, usually it's kind of in an accusatory way. They figure out, this kind of, it's this person's greed, or it's this person's, meanness that's causing all the problems. And when the hero realizes that, then they're able to knock down this straw man representation of what they think that problem is. Oh, the problem is racism. The problem is sexism. The problem is, corporate greed. The problem is government surveillance. And, then they go and they knock it down, or they show it for what it is, and everyone applauds and everyone leaves the theater, and Wonder Woman goes and finds that thing she thinks it is, and she kills it, and then she sees that nothing changed. And then she realizes that she has to continue to fight, and that good people will always continue to fight. And, it's a very mature message. And the fact that so many people in the audience and the box office embraced it shows that audiences want a mature message. They want to think about mature things. And as a filmmaker, I'm excited by that, because I want to tackle more complex and mature stories. And I hope that you do too. And I think that if you choose to, you're going to see that you're latching on to a new trend that's going to take off. At least I hope I'm right about that. Anyway, I would like to thank you for tuning into this podcast. I'll be back soon with another one where I'll try not to pontificate and ramble so much, but I hope I gave you food for thought. Questions or comments, leave them in the comments section of this YouTube video or on my Patreon, patreon.com/Christopher Moonlight. And please become a contributor. I really want to create some worthwhile content, but if I can't get up to that goal, I'm not going to be able to do it on a regular basis like I would like to. So let's get that Patreon up. And, I'm heading back to California. I'm going to be living in California in just 4 weeks. And it's going to be an adventure in filmmaking and going through Hollywood and visiting special effects artists and all sorts of other filmmakers. And I want to bring you along with me. So let's make this happen. Again, patreon.com/Christopher Moonlight. I'll leave a link. Join me and let's make some movies.